The graduation ceremony was in full swing. The crowd applauded as the graduates paraded to receive their diplomas. Amidst the sea of smiles and celebrations, a solitary and barefoot figure emerged. Elizabeth, dressed in her maid's uniform, advanced slowly, holding in her hands the pair of old shoes that had fallen apart on the way. Each step she took on the hot, uneven pavement was a testament to her determination and sacrifice. She had walked for more than an hour to the university with no money for a taxi, anxious not to miss the moment she had worked so hard for. Her son, John, was among the graduates, and Elizabeth did not want to disappoint him. As Elizabeth got closer, John spotted her. His face, which had been radiant with happiness, quickly turned into a mask of embarrassment. He looked around, noticing the stares of his classmates and their families. Some whispered, others laughed discreetly. "John!" Elizabeth called, her voice laden with emotion and exhaustion. "Mom, what are you doing here like this?" John whispered nervously, trying not to attract more attention. "I came to your graduation, dear. My shoes broke on the way, and I had no other pair." She tried to smile, but the strain was evident on her face. "Mom, you couldn't have done this to me. Look at you. You're barefoot and in that uniform. Everyone is staring." John spoke, his voice filled with shame. Elizabeth felt a tightness in her chest. John's words hurt more than any barefoot walk ever could. "I did my best to be here, John. I wanted so much to see you graduate. Just go over there, please. I'll talk to you later," John said, averting his eyes, unable to face his mother. Elizabeth nodded silently and moved away, going to the side of the area where other families were gathered. She felt small, humiliated, but knew she needed to be strong. The ceremony continued, but the moment that should have been a celebration was now marred by shame and pain. When John's name was finally called, Elizabeth clapped with all her might, tears streaming down her face. Even barefoot, with her feet hurting, she felt immense pride for her son. After the ceremony, families gathered for photos. John was surrounded by friends and colleagues, all congratulating him. Elizabeth waited patiently at a distance, not wanting to intrude. Finally, John approached her, still visibly uncomfortable. "Let's go home, Mom." Elizabeth nodded, and together they began to walk away. The silence between them was heavy, full of unspoken words. They walked for a few minutes before John finally broke the silence. "I know you've done a lot for me, Mom, but today was supposed to be special and you showed up like that," he said, his voice full of resentment. Elizabeth stopped and looked directly into John's eyes. "John, I worked 2 jobs to pay for your education. I walked for over an hour because I didn't have money for a taxi. My shoes fell apart and I kept going barefoot. But none of that mattered because I wanted to be here, for you." John felt a lump in his throat, his mother's words piercing his soul. He looked at her injured feet and finally understood the extent of her sacrifice. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know." Elizabeth smiled sadly. "I never wanted you to know. My job was always to make sure you had a better life. But today, I needed to be here, even if barefoot." They continued walking in silence, but something had changed. John held his mother's hand, finally feeling the weight of his gratitude and love. The walk home seemed less long now, and the shame he felt began to turn into a deep respect and admiration. Elizabeth, on the other hand, felt lighter, knowing that despite everything, she was there, by her son's side, on the most important day of his life. Elizabeth sat in the small kitchen of her home, soaking her sore feet in a basin of warm water. The day had been long, but her mind was far away, lost in memories of the past years. She remembered the day John was born. It was a difficult birth, but the joy of holding her son in her arms made it all worthwhile. From that moment on, she dedicated herself entirely to him. John's father had disappeared shortly after his birth, leaving Elizabeth alone to raise her son and provide him with a better future. To do this, she took on 2 jobs. During the day, she worked as a maid, cleaning houses and taking care of tasks others didn't want to do. At night, she worked in a restaurant, washing dishes until late. The money barely covered the bills, but she saved every extra penny for John's education. The years passed in a blur of incessant work and few hours of sleep. There were moments when Elizabeth felt she couldn't go on, but the sight of her son studying, determined to have a better life, gave her strength. Even when her shoes wore out and there was no money to buy new ones, she kept going. No matter the exhaustion, the pain, or the difficulties, John's future was her priority. Elizabeth recalled one particularly tough night. She had come home exhausted, only to find John still awake, struggling with a math problem. She sat beside him, trying to help, but her eyes kept closing from exhaustion. John noticed and said, "Go to sleep, Mom. I'll figure this out. I promise." She hugged him and went to bed, tears in her eyes, not from sadness, but from pride and hope. She knew that all the effort would be worth it. The day of John's graduation was a dream she had cherished for years. Back in the present, Elizabeth looked at the old shoes in the corner of the kitchen. They had been her faithful companions in all those journeys. When they broke on the way to the graduation, she felt a deep pain, not just physical, but symbolic. It was as if all the sacrifices had culminated in that moment, only to be met with shame and rejection. On the morning of the graduation, Elizabeth had finished her shift as usual. She was exhausted, but the anxiety of seeing John receive his diploma gave her energy. With no money for transportation, she began the long walk to the university. Each step was a mix of pride and pain, and when the shoes finally gave way, she continued barefoot, determined to make it to the end. Along the way, memories of all the sleepless nights, the weekends spent working, and the dreams sacrificed accompanied her. She knew that deep down, John appreciated her efforts, but the shame he felt in that moment was a harsh reality they needed to face. With her feet now feeling better, Elizabeth stood up and walked to the small living room. There, hanging on the wall, was John's graduation certificate. She smiled, knowing that all the sacrifice had been rewarded. Even though she couldn't see the pride in her son's face that day, she knew that deep down, he understood. In the end, Elizabeth never sought recognition or gratitude. All she wanted was to see John achieve his dreams. She was willing to keep working if necessary, but she hoped that with his education, John could open new doors and opportunities she never had. When John came home that night, he found Elizabeth still awake, sitting in the kitchen. She smiled at him, and he approached, sitting down next to her. "Mom," he began, his voice trembling, "I've thought a lot about what happened today, about everything you've done for me." Elizabeth placed her hand over his, offering comfort. "I did what any mother would do, John. I want you to have a better life than mine." "I know," he said, his eyes welling up. "I know you sacrificed everything for me, and I want you to know that I'll do everything I can to repay that, to make you proud of me, as I am of you." Elizabeth felt the tears flow again, but this time, they were tears of joy and relief. "I've always been proud of you, John. Always." They hugged, and in that moment, all the sacrifices, all the pain and hardship seemed worth it. For Elizabeth, the real diploma was there, in her son's recognition and love. And for John, the promise of a future full of possibilities, built on the solid foundation of his mother's love and sacrifice. The next morning, tension still hung in the air. Elizabeth woke up early as usual, but the conversation from the previous night echoed in her mind. She knew John was struggling with his feelings, and she had her own emotional wounds to heal. She decided she needed some time to reflect, so she went out for a brief walk around the neighborhood. When she returned, she found John sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. He seemed lost in thought, and Elizabeth approached quietly, sitting down beside him. "We need to talk, John," she said softly. He nodded, still staring at the cup. "I know, Mom. I've been thinking a lot about everything." Elizabeth took a deep breath, preparing to say what was in her heart. "John, I never wanted you to feel ashamed of me. Everything I did was to give you a better chance in life, but I understand that sometimes my efforts weren't enough to shield you from hardships and others' opinions." John lifted his head, meeting his mother's eyes. "I was wrong, Mom. I was so focused on not looking different from everyone else that I forgot how much you sacrificed to get me here. When I saw you yesterday in your uniform and barefoot, all I could think about was how others would see me, not how much you had fought to give me that moment." Elizabeth smiled sadly. "I know it's hard, John, but I want you to know that to me, there's no shame in who we are or what we've done to get here." John swallowed hard, feeling the guilt and shame consuming him. "I know, Mom, and I'm sorry for making you feel small yesterday. You deserve all the respect and recognition in the world." Elizabeth caressed John's hand. "We're here now, and that's what matters. There will always be challenges and judgments, but I want you to know I'm proud of you, no matter what." John hugged his mother, feeling the warmth and unconditional love that had always been there. "I promise, Mom. I'll do everything I can to repay what you've done for me, and I'll work hard so you'll never have to go through that again." Elizabeth felt a deep relief, knowing they had finally understood each other. What matters is that we're in this together, and that, despite the difficulties, we'll always support each other. The following days were spent restructuring and making new decisions. John started looking for jobs in his field, determined to begin his career and ease the financial burden on his mother. Elizabeth, on the other hand, began to think about reducing her work hours now that John was ready to follow his path. A few weeks later, John got an interview for a promising job. He was nervous, but Elizabeth encouraged him, reminding him of all the hard work they had done together. "You're ready, John. Believe in yourself, just as I believe in you." John went to the interview, and while waiting for the result, he and Elizabeth continued to rebuild their relationship, now stronger and based on mutual understanding. The phone call came at the end of the week. John had been hired. He rushed home to tell his mother the news, and she greeted him with a tight hug and tears of joy in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, John." "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. All of this is thanks to your sacrifice and love," he replied, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. With the new job, John began to contribute to the household expenses, allowing Elizabeth to reduce her work hours. Their lives started to improve gradually, and the bond between mother and son grew even stronger. One late afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, Elizabeth looked at the horizon with a serene smile. "John, I always knew you would do great things, and seeing you achieve your dreams is the greatest reward I could have." John held his mother's hand, finally feeling at peace. "And I will always be grateful for everything you've done for me, Mom. We'll build a better future together." Elizabeth nodded, feeling finally relieved and happy. The sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the aching feet, it had all been worth it. She had managed to give John the chance at a better life, and now she could see the fruits of her love and dedication. For Elizabeth, there was no greater victory than seeing her son happy and accomplished. And for John, there was no greater example of strength and resilience than his mother. They knew that together, they could face any challenge life presented, with love, courage, and deep mutual gratitude. If you liked this video and were touched by the story, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.